Baroque style dominated European painting and sculpture for 150 years, and the foundations for this style were laid by two Italians, Caravaggio and Gentileschi. We're going to spend some time talking about and looking at their works, and then we'll move on to the most famous Baroque sculptor during this time. Caravaggio's whole name is Michelangelo Merisi Caravaggio. He was born in 1573, came to Rome in 1590. He led a rather unconventional and violent life. He seemed to constantly be in trouble with the police, and he had a very, very bad temper. A story goes that he actually killed an opponent in a tennis match, and he was imprisoned in Malta for attacking a police officer. Caravaggio was promised that if he returned to Rome, he would be pardoned. And sadly, on his way back to Rome, he died. So one of the things that we always see in his art is this sort of spirit of rebellion. He explored the darker aspects of life and death. He was very dramatic in his presentations, in keeping with that Baroque sensibility, and he was rebellious. He refused to accept idealized or magnificent displays of religious art. In other words, he rejected Renaissance perfection. He resisted elaborate settings, and he perfected the technique of chiaroscura. Chiaroscura is just an art term that means extreme contrasts between light and dark. So as we look at some of Caravaggio's works, I want you to be sensitive to the light and dark contrast there. This is a famous work by Caravaggio called The Calling of St. Matthew. It's about 11 feet by 11 feet, oil on canvas. And here I hope you can see the chiaroscura, the contrast in this painting between the lights and the darks. The light comes from above Jesus' head. This is Jesus right here. And as it follows the point of his finger down to Matthew. In Matthew, this is the moment, according to Caravaggio, that Christ called Matthew into service. Now, in the gospel account in Matthew, Jesus calls Matthew while he's working in a tax booth. Matthew was a tax collector, the sort of lowest of the low at that particular time in the world. And Jesus called him to be his disciple despite his profession. So what you see in this painting is this, certainly the chiaroscura. You also see the drama. You can almost feel like this was action taking place. And Caravaggio does a very good job of making this a real life scene. You can tell Matthew doesn't really want to be found or recognized or called. And when you think about a disciple being called by Christ, which meant denying everything to follow Christ around, you know, you can see the uncertainty and the indecision that a real person might have. And so you see again the drama and the suspense created. Also, it's interesting to note that Matthew and the folks around him have on contemporary 16th, 17th century dress, and Jesus over here and the guy with him has more classical garb on. So this is just an example of a classic Baroque painting with the light and dark contrast, the drama. All of those things are part of the Baroque. This is another Caravaggio, and this is a non-religious theme. It's called the Cardsharps. And again, you can see the drama at work here. The moment where they're playing cards, clearly this guy over here is cheating, right here, and so you get this whole little drama played out. Another card playing scene, this is by a different painter, the same period of time. Again, we're cheating, but you see the drama in the works. This is a Caravaggio, back to Caravaggio here. This is the Madonna of Loretto in 1604. And again, you see some of the same things at stake. You see the contrast between light and dark. This is a modern day, modern in the sense of 1604, day representation of people paying homage to Christ. You have very ordinary looking Mary with very ordinary looking baby Jesus at the threshold of a very ordinary looking home. The only way we really know, besides the title of the painting and the fact that there's a halo around Mary's head, the only way we really know that these are spiritual religious figures. Elsewise, it just looks like two men bowing down for some reason to a child and a mom. This painting at first was very, very controversial. How could you have Mary and Jesus portrayed in such normal terms? But the point here was to connect the viewer with his or her religion, to make it accessible. So by making Mary and Jesus normal, ordinary, everyday people, you can make that connection between your spirituality and what you're seeing a little bit more easily. Mary and Jesus were people, Caravaggio seems to say. Let's not forget that they were people. Gentileschi is another painter that I want us to look at. This is her depiction of a very famous event, Judith slaying Holofernes. Artemisia Gentileschi's father studied Caravaggio's works and based his own painting style on them. He lived for much of his life in France and England after leaving Italy, and was responsible for spreading Caravaggio's values and techniques. He passed these down to his daughter, Artemisia. She was considered the first woman in the West to make a significant contribution to the art of her time. This is her most famous painting. Judith was a Jewish heroine. She was trying to stop an attack on her people by the Assyrians, so she entered the enemy camp with her maidservant to confront the Assyrian leader Holofernes. They get into the camp by charming the guards. They also charm Holofernes. They convince him to delay his plans to attack. They have dinner, he gets drunk and passes out. Judith takes advantage of his drunken state and cuts off his head. In this painting you can see the violence, the richness, the chiaroscuro. Interestingly, Artemisia was raped, so you can sort of see the anger and retribution here. Now, what I want us to do is to compare Gentileschi's version of this with Caravaggio's. Caravaggio's came 20 years earlier, but it's the same story being depicted. Gentileschi's version is called Judith slaying Holofernes. Caravaggio's version is called Judith beheading Holofernes. And I think you can see with the violence of the first painting, slaying works. With the very demure placement of the sword here, you can definitely see this is a beheading. So even in the names of the paintings, Gentileschi's is much more violent. And let's continue to compare and contrast these. In Gentileschi's painting, Judith looks strong. She looks self-assertive. She looks deliberate. She holds his head down with one hand and the sword with the other. She's cool, she's detached, but she shows determination in her face and assertiveness and concentration. Her maidservant here is strong and young and helpful. She's helping to hold him down. In this painting, you really get the sense that these two women are doing it all on their own. And Holofernes is actually struggling here. Now, look over at Caravaggio's paintings. Caravaggio's painting is much more in keeping with the biblical account that said Judith needed God's help to carry out the plan. Judith here is leaning back from Holofernes, seemingly disgusted at what she's doing. There's no power here. She doesn't seem to be in control. The maidservant is old and just a bystander. Holofernes doesn't even really fight. They're not holding him down. It's almost as if everyone in that painting knows God has decreed it, and so the death will happen. Bernini is perhaps the most famous Italian Baroque artist. There are many Bernini fountains, palaces, and churches that decorate Rome. His dad was a sculptor in Florence, and one of his earliest works is David, which we need to compare with Michelangelo's David. All right, I hope you can see clearly the differences between these two sculptures. Remember, Michelangelo's version of David is 18 feet tall. It's huge. It's colossal. Bernini's is life-size. It's 5 feet 6 inches tall. You can see the action, the energy, the emotion, the psychological state in the Bernini sculpture, whereas in the Renaissance you see the calm characteristics, the balance. These two sculptures are hallmarks of their particular styles and good contrast with one another. This is another famous Bernini. It's called Saint Teresa in Ecstasy. It's 11 feet tall. Here, Saint Teresa is having a vision of an angel who is about to pierce her heart. There's clearly an erotic, dramatic element in this sculpture, and you can see the contrast between the lights and the darks. So all of these things are indeed characteristics of the Baroque. The drama, the psychological exploration, the contrast between the light and the dark, and are very, very much a reaction to the calm and the balance of the Renaissance.